Morning. We've got lots of interesting material to get through today, so let's have our first sentence up on the screen and we'll get straight to work. We're looking at the letter of St. Paul to the Colossians, chapter 3 and verse 18, which says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord." Now, living as we do in the 21st century, the idea that a wife should submit to her husband feels very wrong. At least it does to about half of us. So before I get into the detail of this sentence, I want to give you a little bit of the background into which it was written. And let me start by telling you that the world in which Jesus lived was very chauvinist, unapologetically so. For example, one legal scholar writing in the 1st century said that if you catch your wife in a situation that implies immorality, you may kill her without trial. However, if she catches you in a similar position, you may ignore her response. In the ancient world, you see, females were not people, they were possessions. Historians and archaeologists have actually uncovered inventory lists from several thousand years ago in which men audit the things that they own. And these men talk about their land and their cattle and their sheep and their goats and their wives. Almost every picture of a woman from the ancient world has her working her fingers to the bone for the pleasure and the benefit of the men in her life. So it's unsurprising that a rabbi writing in the 1st century should say that it is better to be born a dog than to be born a woman. So if you were a woman living in the time of the New Testament, you would have had little or no legal rights. Your daily chores were all about keeping the man in your life happy, and to that man you would have been subject. You were not your husband's equal, you were your husband's wife. The Greek thinker Plato and Aristotle actually said that the rule of a household is a monarchy, for every house is under one head. That's a Greek way of saying that in his own home a man is king, and his wife is not his queen, she is his subject. And because people thought that way, lawmakers, social thinkers from all sorts of cultures were very keen to reinforce the idea that women were inferior to men. And so all sorts of rules were written to govern the way that people behaved within a marriage. These rules were written to protect society. People genuinely believed that if a woman misbehaved and disrespected her husband, then society itself would fall apart. A bad wife, it was thought, was the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. So if you went to marriage counselling in the ancient world, it would have taken about 30 seconds. Your counsellor would say to you, men should rule their wives, wives should be ruled by their husband, and we generally refer to this period of history as the good old days. And then Jesus came along, of course, and ruined everything. As far as Jesus was concerned, women were not objects created for the pleasure of men. They were people created for a purpose equal with men. And so right from the very start, the Jesus movement was unusual in that it treated the women within its ranks as being fully equal. This is the sort of message that was being taught in the early church. In Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Now we, living as we do in Canada in 2015, take that kind of sentiment for granted. We take it for granted that the husband and wife relationship is a relationship of equal partners. We take it for granted that the women in this room are equal and indistinguishably so with the men in this room. But whilst that is true in our culture, it was not true in the culture of the 1st century. In the 1st century, this was a new idea, a dangerous idea, an insidious one. And the newness of it caused problems for the church. Women in the 1st century church, having correctly understood that they were free from the old ideas of being inferior to men, having correctly understood that they were now fully equal with men, then incorrectly understood that that meant they could behave any way they liked. And so it seems that both in the home and in the church, they started to act in ways that were inappropriate for the culture in which they lived. it seems they started to do the ancient equivalent of burning their bras. So perhaps they were speaking out of turn to their husbands in public. Perhaps they were talking in a way that was perceived as disrespectfully to them. Perhaps they were dressing in clothes that their husbands didn't approve of. Now, to you and I, this is no big deal. These are non-issues. We're used to this. We deal with it. But in the first century, this is a massive PR problem for the church. People were already thinking that the Jesus movement was socially subversive. People were already thinking that this was a dangerous criminal organization that threatened the very fabric of society. And in first century Rome, people are already struggling with various forms of female liberation. And now the church are coming along, and the church are saying men and women are equal. Men and women are the same. There's no difference. And then Christian women in the church are starting to really latch onto these freedoms and behave in ways that were considered inappropriate. And society was having a major problem with the church for this reason. And into that specific cultural context, Paul says what he says. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. Now, this sentence is, as you will have gathered, perhaps the most unremarkable sentence written in antiquity. There is no news in this sentence. Every culture, every legal system, every religion in the ancient world said exactly what Paul is saying here. This is the accepted wisdom of its time. Nothing was better than a wife who submitted to her husband. Nothing was worse than a wife who nagged and disrespected her husband. When men in the ancient world went out for beer, they would compare notes about how submissive their wives were. And the more submissive a man's wife, the more respect he had among his peers. And you'll notice, perhaps to your chagrin and to mine, that Paul in the Bible does not dispute this cultural assumption, and nor can he. In the ancient world, the legal system, the legal situation, was that the husband was the paterfamilias, the head of the family. And as such, legally, he had absolute authority over everything that happened within his home. It was therefore a matter of legal fact that a wife had to submit to her husband. So all this sentence is saying, in essence, is that wives should do what they are already legally obliged to do anyway. But they should do it voluntarily. He's saying to the church, women of Colossae, who I'm writing to, yes, you are free. Yes, you are equal to the men in your life. Yes, you are fully liberated from those silly sexist assumptions that have held sway for generations. All of that is true. Now, as a means of serving Jesus within your day and age, take all of your freedom, take all of your liberation, all of your equality, and willingly, voluntarily submit to your husbands. Voluntarily do what you're culturally and legally obliged to do anyway. Submit to your husband. Understand that your role in that marriage is to serve his needs. So far, so good. Then he says, husbands, love your wives and don't be harsh with them. Now, in a first century context, what he's hitherto said to wives in verse 18 was very normal. However, what he says to husbands in verse 19 was completely unheard of. In the ancient world, there was all sorts of household rules of the sort that we're reading today, and not a single one of them says that husbands should love their wives. The job of the paterfamilias, as the head of the home, was to rule his home efficiently. and to make sure that everyone within the home was doing the things that he thought ought to be done. The love that a man had, the affection that a man had, the desire that a man had, was something that he reserved for his concubine, if he was rich enough to have one, or for his mistress, as he almost certainly would have had, or his girlfriend. Nobody in the Roman Empire, nobody expected that a marriage would be a thing of love, that a husband would reserve all of that for his wife. And so for Paul to say, I want you to love your wife, is for him to say something very unexpected within his culture. Have affection for, have desire for, have love for your wife, therefore care for her welfare, be attentive to her needs, whatever her needs may be. And as soon as we can get into the business of talking about needs within a marriage, we get into the whole business of how you feel when your needs aren't getting met. The unwritten deal is, I'll meet your needs and you'll meet my needs. But if you stop meeting my needs, then that means I don't have to meet your needs anymore. That's the deal, right? Because the fact is, if you stop meeting my needs as a wife, then you then become a bad wife. Therefore, that gives me an excuse to be a bad husband. And when Paul talks about the husband not being harsh, he uses the word harsh in a passive way. So what he means is, you know what, guys, let's just get real about this. Women aren't perfect. I know this is news to all of you, but they're not. And so maybe you've gotten yourself a bad wife. Maybe over 20, 30, 40 years of marriage, she's become what you perceive to be a bad wife. And she doesn't meet your needs anymore. And when that happens, eventually you find yourself getting harsh. The word harsh in ancient Greek means bitter. And in the ancient world, this bitterness that men felt was entirely appropriate within a marriage. Sirach, the first century lawyer, said, if she doesn't go as you direct and meet your needs, you may separate from her. In other words, if she stops meeting your needs, you can close yourself off from her, emotionally, romantically, and in any other way you choose. And disturbingly, from a male perspective, what Paul says here isn't conditional. He's saying, okay, guys, you may have found a bad wife, or your wife may have become bad over the years of your marriage from your perspective. She may not be meeting your needs anymore, whatever those needs may be. And she may be an embarrassment to you. She may be a frustration to you. But nonetheless, the Christian rule is incumbent upon you. You are to love her. And your love is to be unconditional. Your love for her, your meeting of her needs, is not to be dependent upon her loving you and her meeting your needs. This is one of those parts in the Bible that seems unreasonable. It seems difficult and discordant. And it is, despite what we would wish to the contrary, it is sometimes difficult to take bits out of the Bible and apply them into our 21st century life. But I would suggest that if these verses are saying anything to us today, what they're saying to us is that you as a wife should be willing to put your husband's needs before yours, and you as a husband should be willing to put your wife's needs before yours. And however unpalatable and sexist we find some of this language, and we surely do, I ask you, would it be such a bad thing in a relationship if each partner in that relationship saw it as his or her responsibility to put the needs of the other person before their own? If both people were playing by those rules, would that make for a bad relationship or a great relationship? I would put it to you, it would be great. Fantastic. Of course, it requires risk. It requires a willingness to abandon the tight hold we have on our own needs and our own rights and our own parameters. But this willingness is quintessentially Christian. Signing up for the Jesus movement is signing up for, I'll put your needs before mine. Have a look at this. This is the definition of Christian behavior in the New Testament. You should, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you look to the interests of others. In Christianity, me first is the last thing that we should ever say. Next sentence. He says, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Now, again, there is no new news in this sentence. Children in every culture are required to obey their parents. And in the strict households of the ancient world, that obedience was simply not up for discussion. Which sort of makes this unremarkable sentence very remarkable indeed. Paul is getting down to child level, and he's saying to the children of the church who have no place in society, and he's saying to them, hey, you guys are a part of this Jesus thing too. And because that is so, you have a responsibility, even at this young age, to live the sort of life that God wishes for you to live. And that starts now in the simple things by obeying your parents. And then, having said that unremarkable sentence to the children of the church, he then turns to the fathers. And he says, fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Two key words there, the word embitter and the word discouraged. The word embitter means to rebel against authority. It's the classic teenager word. And the advice that Paul gives to fathers is, guys, be sensible. Don't lay down so many rules in your home that your children are then forced into a situation where absolutely everything that they do breaks one of your rules. Let your kids be kids. Yes, they should obey you, but you should go easy on them, as easy as you can. Because if you don't, they'll get discouraged. They'll lose hope. And they'll get to a place where they end up thinking, well, what's the point in me even trying to do the right thing, because everything I do is the wrong thing? What's the point in me trying to do good, because everything I do is labelled not good enough? Ergo, I may as well misbehave, because that's what my behavior gets labelled as anyway. Eventually a person gets to a point where they just, and this happens to the best of us, we just accept the labels people give us, and we live them, we own them. That's why it's really wrong that you never tell your kids that they're stupid, or clumsy, or immoral, or any of those things. Because if you say it often enough, they'll just shrug their shoulders and say, okay, I guess I am stupid. I guess I am not good enough. I guess I am ugly. I guess I am immoral. So that's my reality. I may as well go and live it. Be very, very careful with how we label people. And then, having spoken about the relationship between a husband and a wife, and a parent and a child, he then goes on to talk about the relationship between a slave and a master. And the first thing he says is, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything. Now, to those of us who rightly feel that slavery is abhorrent, it's very disappointing indeed that there are sentences in the Bible, such as this one, that rather than calling for the emancipation of slaves, instead calls for slaves to simply knuckle down and be good slaves. However, being historically real about it, the writers of the Bible could hardly say anything else. In the ancient world, slavery was an unquestioned reality. To give you an idea of how unquestioned it was, in the first century, it's estimated that about 1/3 of the entire population of the Roman Empire lived and worked as slaves. 33% of society were in this situation. And so because many people were slaves, and because many of those slaves were attracted to the liberated language of the Jesus movement, the early church couldn't ignore the slave issue. And so once again we read the obvious. Slaves, obey your masters in everything. Now imagine if you were a slave in the church, and many early Christians were slaves. You go to church on a Sunday and you're looking for something good, and one of the preachers stands up and says, "Slaves, I've got a word for you." "Oh, what is it?" Because that's probably how slaves talk, I don't know. The word is, obey your masters. Oh, thanks very much. You do know we're slaves, right? That's what we do every stinking day. We obey our masters with their whips and their chains. That's our life. You don't know much about slavery, Mr. Bible writer, do you? I already have to obey my masters in everything. You're just telling me to do what I already have to do. To which Paul goes on and says, well, no, there's more to it than that. You should obey your masters in everything, not only when their eye is on you to curry favour, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. When he talks about them working hard when someone's eye is on them, he's using a well-known phrase from the world of first century labour relations. Supervisors, business owners and the like would regularly use this phrase. They would say such and such an employee only gives good eye service. And that was their way of saying, when I'm there, when I'm watching, they're awesome. They work really, really well. But when I'm not there and I'm not watching, they are pretty useless. They're slacking off, having a smoke, checking their texts, doing whatever they're doing. And apparently this was a huge problem for slaves. They'd be working in a group, and one of them would look out and they'd say, hey, it's okay, the coast is clear, the boss is gone, let's take it easy. None of you do this, right? Let's slack off, let's do the minimum, let's just coast, and then when the boss comes back, we'll pull our finger out again. Paul says to slaves, don't you be like that. Instead, understand that there is a direct correlation between your Christianity and your conduct in the workplace. Christianity, remember, isn't about what you do in church on a Sunday. It isn't about singing the songs and praying the prayers and reading the Bible verses. It's about how you behave at home, and in this sentence, how you behave at work. Something about your Monday to Friday 9 to 5 life says something, positively or negatively, about the genuineness of your Christian belief. That's worship. And so he says to them, you may have no choice about what you do, but you do have a choice in the way that you do it. And your Christianity is proved or not in the little choices that you make every day. Now, for Paul to talk to slaves about their performance in the workplace is actually very unusual in the cultures of the ancient world. Because to talk about the way you behave, to talk about the little choices that you make every day, is to assume that you are a responsible human being. And that was an assumption that was never ever made about slaves. Both Plato and Aristotle, for example, said that slaves are not people, they are machines. And just as one would not think of imposing moral obligations upon machines, so too one should not think about imposing obligations upon slaves, because they're simply not smart enough to carry them out. Slaves, it was thought, needed to be handled as children at best, and beasts of burden at worst. But in this sentence, Paul treats them with respect, as people who are fully capable of choice and decision. So here's your situation. You've got no choice about massive areas of your life, like the crappy job you do. But you have every choice about the way you do that crappy job. Make those choices and make them well as part of your Christian life. This is why he goes on to say, therefore, whatever you do, good or bad, boring or stimulating, well paid or not, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. One of the real dangers, I suppose, of being a slave was the drudgery that slavery made work a thing to be endured. And if your work is a thing that you endure, certain aspects of your personality get switched off and suppressed and withdrawn. You go through the motions, but your heart and mind aren't in it. The better alternative, I think, is a personal engagement with the job that you do. And so even if what you do is nothing more than the obedience of a slave, Paul says to the church, it is nonetheless a means of expressing your devotion to the God in whom you believe. And when he says that you should do your work as if you were working for God, even though you're actually working for an idiot, this is a dilemma I think we all face. The issue at stake here is what motivates a person to work well. And in the New Testament we learn that even dehumanizing, boring, unfulfilling jobs can be expressions of our spirituality if they're done with enthusiasm and passion and excellence. Real life, from a New Testament perspective, isn't always found in getting a better deal. It's found in making the situation that you have better, doing what you currently do with a little bit more oomph, a little bit more enthusiasm, and a little bit more passion. There is nobility and dignity in doing what you do well. Do you ever meet people who are doing some job and you can just tell it sucked the life out of them? Have you ever had that job? Do you have that job today? It's killing you. It's a vacuum on your soul. And how much more of a difference would it make if you approached that soul-destroying job with a slightly different attitude? So often in life, we wait for our circumstances to change. And we think that would make us better. If I had a better relationship, if my children lived better, if my family were better, if my friends were better, if my health was better, if my job was better, if my finances were better, then I'd start being better. That is crap, and you know it's crap. It's an excuse for laziness. How much better and more sense does it make for you to stop waiting for everything else to be better and you just decide to start getting better yourself? I'm not going to wait for my circumstances to change. I'm going to change. I'm going to own my own life, my own decisions. I'm going to take responsibility and start doing what I need to do to make things better for me and those around me. But that requires effort, and our human nature is adverse to effort, right? True? Okay. Sorry, did I say the wrong thing? Okay. I wasn't talking to you, I was talking to me. Is that one of those calls that you call me in 10 minutes because this date is killing me, and we should all have one of those for church. Okay, let's skip to let's skip to the next slide. No, the next slide. Yeah, the next one. Okay, perfect. So these words would have been read out in someone's house. The early church met in houses, and the people who hosted church, for the most part, tended to be, the business owners and the rich people, because they were the only people in the church who had big homes. So in church on a Sunday, you had this small minority of people who who had slaves. And in church there were slave owners and slaves and everyone else in between. Imagine how the pin would have dropped when this sentence was read out in church. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. When these words were read out, there would have been stunned silence in the audience. It was accepted wisdom that to talk about justice and fairness for slaves was to talk about a non-subject. Slaves were machines, not people, and therefore issues of justice and fairness and what's right didn't apply. So what Paul says here is truly remarkable in his culture. As the business owner, as the person who runs slaves, you are to do all of that, fully cognizant of the fact that God is watching. You're not just to give good eye service to God in church. You're to give good eye service to God Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And again, this is discordant. The unquestioned assumption, I suppose then as now, is I got to do what's right for me. I got to do what's right for my family, for my finances. So I'll keep all the money and you'll barely get by. I'll get more and more, you'll get less and less. This isn't Christian. The New Testament has a struggle with this attitude. And so what the New Testament is saying here to those people in that church was, you've got to do what's right. You've got to do what's fair. You've got to treat other people properly. It's not just about what you need to get richer and richer. It's about what them and what they need to get on and to get by and to climb the ladder. You know, there's nothing I hate more in myself, and nothing the New Testament hates more in others, than selfishness. To sign up for the way of Jesus is to sign up for a program of deconstructing your endless obsession with you and what you need and what you want and what your needs are, and to place yourself in a situation where you are more open to other people, to what they need and to what they want, and there's no way around it. It's just awfully difficult. It's awfully difficult. But this is the way of Jesus. It wasn't easy for him to go to the cross. It's not easy for us to carry the cross. But carrying it means putting others first. It's not all about you. It's not all about what you need. It's about what those around you need. And that's to be our Christian attitude. And with that, Paul ends his letter to the church in Colossae. Any questions on any of that? No? Good. Awesome. Thank you. You want to pray?
Yeah.
Why are you so quiet? Did I say something wrong today?
No.
I feel I said something wrong.
Why? Because he said it right.
Do you know, sometimes, the Bible, sometimes it says things that are discordant. Sometimes it says things that are difficult. But usually those are the things we need to hear and that will do us the most good. Right? You know it's true. Okay. Let's pray. In all your relationships, the good ones and the bad ones, the easy ones and the ones that make you pull your hair out, I pray that the Lord will bless you. I pray that He'll keep you. I pray that His favour will shine upon you, and that you will ever walk in His peace and His prosperity. I ask this for you, for me, and for all those whom we love. In Christ's name, Amen.